This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW, flyers, that is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is part 2 of flyer number 412, entitled Masculist Disciplining of Women, carrying straight on. As the masculist message spreads amongst young men, young women will come under tremendous moral pressure to fip up by bothering to study career-competent majors at high school, but in practice some 80% of young women don't. They choose to study the soft option, the fluffied majors, that will turn them into fluffies, and hence in future years will be made miserable by the rise and rise of masculist and MGTOW philosophies that demand that women get off their fat parasitic asses and fip up or be forced to rot on the shelf. Fluffies are hated by masculists in the same way as abolitionists in the US in the 1800s hated slavers of Negroes and even went to war over the issue, that is, the US Civil War. Masculists are imposing such a severe measure of discipline on fluffies by forcing them to fip up that if young women don't, then they will pay an extremely heavy price. They will be ostracised by men, by society, cast out, rejected, pariahed, spat at. Since most women are horrified at such a prospect, we can expect that young women will stream into the hard option, that's math and the sciences, at high school, and STEM and the professions at college, so that they will improve their chances of getting a man. The 2020s is the decade of men's lib, that is, liberating themselves from being man-slaves to hated fluffy parasites by refusing to have any contact with them, utterly rejecting them as vermin to be wiped out. Thus fluffies will die off, as most women get shit scared that if they don't fip up, given the enormous moral pressure on them to do so, coming from men, in brackets, the majority of whom by the end of the decade will have absorbed the masculist message, and from society as a whole, that is, from the media, from parents, from school, from peers, etc. A few decades from now, there will be almost no fluffies left, since those women who do remain as fluffies will have gone underground. So strong will be the social pressure against them, against their man-slavery, that they will prefer to live a quiet, obscure existence rather than being castigated publicly by being spat at for being a fluffy parasite of the labour and money of a man. Fluffies will be so severely disciplined, that is, punished, that they die out as they should. In practice, many masculists live either as MGTOWs, that's men going their own way, or have a serious relationship with a woman, but on a LAT, that's L-A-T, basis. The MGTOWs are men who refuse to marry, reject paternity, and spend their money on themselves due to the toxicity of marriage and divorce, thanks to the hated fluffy feminist takeover of the divorce courts, making marriage such a shitty deal for men that in many countries now 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and have kids, sending young women into a panic because they find with boyfriend after boyfriend that they cannot persuade him to give her his sperm, thus prolonging her babylessness with time running out as her biological clock ticks ever louder in her 30s. Some MGTOWs are so pissed off with the parasitic and solipsistic nature of women that they refuse to even pump and dump women, living the lifestyle of a MGTOW monk. Other MGTOWs do have relationships with women, but don't marry them and certainly don't give them kids, given their hatred of the fluffy feminist-controlled divorce courts. Another name for the second kind of MGTOWing is living the LAT, that's L-A-T, lifestyle, that is, living apart together, that is, the tway-twiff lifestyle, in brackets, tway-twiff equals 2A, 2F equals 2 apartments, 2 FIPs, where both the male and female partner have their own apartment and both are FIPs, so that there is no financial parasitism of one of them on the other, and both have an apartment to return to when the relationship fails, as most do. A quarter of singles in the UK actually live the lat lifestyle. As standards of living rise, more people can afford to have their own individual apartment, so can benefit from the advantages of the latting lifestyle, having their own space that they can return to on a regular basis to recharge their emotional and existential batteries. Full-time living together breeds complacency, female nagging and controlling of men, etc. By latting, for example, 4 days a week together, 3 days apart per week, keeps the sex fresh, since the couple is sex deprived for 3 days a week, and the woman cannot nag her man or try to control him. Otherwise, he just walks away back to his own apartment. Thus, he disciplines her, keeps her civil and nice to him, or he punishes her by dumping her. Women know this, so are strongly motivated to be nice to her latting man, or she can so easily lose him. Latting is a great disciplining device for a man, and vice versa, since the same logic applies to the woman. So latting keeps the relationship civil for both sexes. Bullet. Masculist annihilation of fluffy feminists. Masculists have an even greater hatred of fluffy feminists than for fluffies, since it's bad enough that a fluffy feminist is a fluffy, that is, a man-slaving parasite, but she's also a hypocrite, since she wants equal rights for women in the parliaments, but rejects equal obligations on women to fip up in the divorce courts, expecting to be able to continue parasiting off the money of a man, in this case her ex-husband, with no moral nor legal obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fip up. One of the main political and ideological aims of the Masculists is to see the men faring of the divorce courts, which will cause a fundamental shift in the way that society is organised, since it will imply that nearly all women be FIPs, so will have to be socialised by parents and teachers to be FIPs. Masculists want the legislation of the paternity rejection right, so that a man's life is not ruined by being forced to pay for a kid that he doesn't want, thus manslaving him for decades. Women have the MARA, that's maternity rejection right, but men don't have the PARA, which is the greatest example of sexual discrimination that exists, and it's not against women, but against men, that screams out for reform. To men fare the divorce courts, it's essential that women be FIPs, so society needs new gender roles, so that women are all FIPs and raised and educated to be FIPs. Feminists have been pushing women to fip up for decades, offering women the carrot of being financially independent of a man, giving her life more flexibility. Masculists provide the stick of forcing women to fip up or be severely punished by not getting a man, left rotting on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and spat at. The legislation of the PARA will force women to grow up, to fip up, to take financial responsibility for their own lives by bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and college, so that they become morally and financially responsible FIPs as adults. Fluffy feminists, by definition, are feminists in the sense of them wanting equal rights with men in the parliaments, but are still fluffy parasites in terms of their careers, still expecting that some gullible manslave will pay for her to raise her kids in a middle-class house that he pays for. This fluffy feminist hypocrisy makes such women hated by the Masculists, so are treated with an even greater level of contempt by the Masculists than are the fluffies. The Masculists aim to wipe both groups of women off the face of the earth by totally ignoring them, forcing them to fip up and grow up so that they will pull their own financial weight, behaving as responsible adults. When Masculists come across fluffy feminists who lash out at men for the ways that men oppress women, these Masculists then usually explode at them in Masculist rage, pointing out to the monoconscious, ignorant feminists that in reality women oppress men far worse, since too many women still see men as cash machines to be sexploited, forced to pay for women to sit on their fat, and in brackets, and I mean fat, given that 40% of women are obese and 30% are fat, making 2/3 of women so bulging with excess blubber that they have made themselves unfuckable, which is why Masculists label such women, 2/3 of women, fuffs, that's F-U-F, that is fat, unfuckable females, or yuckers, evoking the yuck reaction in a man seeing an obese woman naked. Cockshrinkers, the typical reaction of a man seeing a naked obese woman, close brackets, on their fat parasitic asses. Fluffy feminists will be confronted increasingly in the coming few years by very angry masculists who will have no qualms about gender politically haranguing such feminazi hypocrites out of the room with venomous masculist rhetoric, telling these monoconscious ignorami that in reality women oppress men far worse, since women's oppression of men is continuous and lasts decades. For example, their fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, women's financial parasitism, women's manslavery, women's many decades-lasting gender crimes against men, for example, paternity fraud, in brackets, in about 5% of pregnancies the husband is not the father, pill lying, no para for men, women's tooth and nail objection to the legislation of the para, etc. Monoconscious feminists are going to be very shocked and pained in the coming years when they are confronted by a collective masculist rage at them coming from the masculisted men in their audiences that they are haranguing with feminist rhetoric. These feminazis will feel very uncomfortable when they are more than challenged by counter-masculist rhetoric, especially when it comes from men who are smarter and a lot more verbally aggressive than they are, and who have had their masculist consciousness well and truly raised, who will not tolerate her monoconscious feminazi bigotry and will bite her fucking head off as she remains, if she remains, a real monoconscious feminazi bigot. This is the end of part 2.